Well, this came out last week, and so naturally I had to pick this up. This is the Castlevania Anniversary Collection for PC and also available for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. This is the second of 3 collections released by Konami to commemorate their 50th anniversary, with the first being last month's arcade classics sets, which I have yet to play, and the final being a Contra collection due next month. The Castlevania Anniversary Collection contains 8 classic Castlevania titles, including the original Castlevania, Castlevania II Simon's Quest, Castlevania III Dracula's Curse, Super Castlevania 4, Castlevania Bloodlines, Castlevania The Adventure, Castlevania II Belmont's Revenge, and as an added bonus, you also have Kid Dracula for the Nintendo Family Computer, officially localized and released for the first time ever. So in short, a revisit of the franchise's origins, which, contrary to what some might believe, did not begin in 1997. At some point in time, there will be a patch that enables you to play the Japanese version of these games, perhaps the most vital addition you can make to such a collection, considering the substantial differences between regional releases. However, at the time of recording, there is no such patch, and therefore the feature is unavailable. The collection also includes a bonus ebook thing, which includes some brief instructions, interviews, behind-the-scenes scans and information. Some interesting stuff here if you're into that sort of thing. There's a save state feature where you can save one state per game, an option to watch your last play at a later time, which might seem pointless for some people but might have its uses for others, and the usual display options with screen sizes and frames. That's about it, really. The Castlevania Anniversary Collection is essentially a revisit of the franchise's origins, a point made abundantly clear in the brief description of the package, so it explains the choice of games. Castlevania, after all, started off as a series of side-scrolling action platform games where you used a whip to fight vampires and monsters and all that fun stuff, and this collection explores the evolution of that concept rather nicely with 5 of its games at least. Start with the original Castlevania and deal with stiff controls and less than fair circumstances. Venture out into the open with Simon's Quest and appreciate the bad spelling that was retained for this release. Extinguish Dracula's Curse by finding allies and branching paths. Master the whip's full multi-directional potential in Super Castlevania 4 with the series' first major and ultimately short-lived evolution. And experience Bloodlines with 2 distinct characters in the sole original Sega outing. And then you have the 2 Game Boy games, The Adventure and Belmont's Revenge. Will let you play in either black and white, dot matrix green, or default Super Game Boy colors. And finally, there's Kid Dracula, the oddball of the group, a cutesy, comical platformer where you control Kid Dracula and shoot fireballs at enemies while eventually gaining extra powers as you progress through the game. Those who have only played the Game Boy entry that we did get back in the day will no doubt find a similar and still somewhat different game in this Famicom release. It's a game that has its fans, and certainly a nice bonus to see a rare game from the past get localized for a new day, but personally, it's a game occupying a spot best served for better options. Whether it be the MSX Vampire Killer, or Castlevania Chronicles, or even finish off the Game Boy trilogy with Legends, but regardless, 8 games of varying quality from good to excellent. Well, the adventure is still slow as shit, but it fits, I guess, with the overall theme. The emulation for these 8 games are pretty spot on, running pretty much as you'd expect these games to run on any top-of-the-line emulator for the most part, or even on functional hardware capable of playing these games in their original cartridge format. There might be some rare occasional audio pops here and there, but for the most part these are minor instances. The games themselves see little to no changes, the little coming in the form of copyright information on the title screen. So the games pretty much play the same with no changes in gameplay or performance, which means if the original versions were hit with bouts of sprite flickering or slowdown, well, you'd be getting that here as well. On the flip side of things, games with passwords still have their passwords despite having the save state feature, so you could start off later in these games and claim those achievements faster than usual, that is if you care for those sorts of things. Unfortunately, while the 8 games included are solid for the most part, everything around those 8 games leave much to be desired, most notably the lack of customization. And I'm not talking about anything deep or technical, I mean really simple common sense options that should be included in every game these days, because almost every game do include these options. For example, the lack of button customization built into the collection itself, with the exception of Bloodlines and Castlevania 4, which include their own button configuration options. You only have one set of controls, and it's not the most ideal setup, although to be fair, it's still playable and functional, especially if you played a lot of Wii Virtual Console NES games with the classic controller. It pretty much operates along those same lines, but if you wanted to change things around, you'd have to do it through Steam, which feels like a cop-out because if other games could include this button customization option, there's no reason why this could not. Display options are also limited to 6 options. 3 of them involve scan lines, which I've never cared for because they always look terrible. And the only 4x3 option in this collection has scan lines, so I'm always playing with this tiny square, which is fine for a monitor, not so much for a television. And while I can appreciate the color option for the Game Boy titles, if they had included the recolored versions from the Konami collection on the Game Boy Color, would have made the package just a bit sweeter. And what else is there? Well, there's only one save state per game that you're allowed, which isn't a deal breaker for me, but would have been nice to include 1 or 2 more, unless there's like $20 DLC down the line or something that will give you like 2 more. There's only 3 frames to choose from, with 1 being all black, so really you only have 2. The fact that being unable to swap between regional releases until a patch comes along to fix the problem is baffling at best. Oh, and sometimes when playing Castlevania, the ROM will lock up like so. So if you don't have a save state handy, then yar. Still, despite these setbacks, the collection as a whole is fairly solid fare, even if it's lacking a bit in the meat. And if nothing else, the emulation for Castlevania 3 appears to be spot on, as evident by this final battle playing out exactly as it's supposed to, unlike a decade ago when the game was featured on the Wii Virtual Console and the lasers came out kinda funny. Overall, the Castlevania Anniversary Collection is a fine collection if you just want to play some old school Castlevania games in one semi-convenient package, if you just want some officially licensed emulation of these classic games, or if you just want to support any semblance of Castlevania product coming out, in the hopes that Konami will either churn out another one of these collections, or perhaps even a whole new game. At least that's usually the mindset some people would have when they buy rubbish of this sort, of which this collection is not. The collection itself is a solid chronicle of Castlevania's early years, which seems to be the whole point that people seem to overlook for some reason, and the games run well enough with one exception, but in terms of presentation and features, it feels very bare bones with minimal options and an ebook that, while somewhat interesting, isn't enough of a selling point for those who might have these games in other forms or are content with doing the emulation thing of that other variety. Still, for what it offers, 8 classic Castlevania games of the vintage variety, it gets the job done and, barring a couple quibbles, is a perfectly fine collection of classic video games.